So, I want you to think back to a time maybe early in your career, or even just back in school.
Oh, yeah, back when just finding the information was the hardest part of the whole project.
Exactly. You know that feeling, digging through dense physical reports or running those endless search queries, just looking for that one elusive data point.
Right, or trying to synthesize like a dozen different perspectives into something that was even remotely coherent.
Yes, because for decades, that was the primary bottleneck in any kind of knowledge work. Information was scarce. Gathering it took massive amounts of human time and, energy.
But today, if you look around, that dynamic has completely inverted.
Right.
The problem isn't finding information anymore. The problem is that we are just drowning in answers that sound incredibly convincing.
Exceptionally professional.
Yes, and sometimes completely wrong.
Completely wrong. And that's the core of today's deep dive. We are looking at a really fascinating framework developed by Dr. Jonathan H. Westover in his article, Verification-Centric Leadership, Governing Truth in the Generative Age.
It's a great piece.
It really is. And our mission today is to explore how leaders, and frankly, anyone who learns or makes decisions can survive and thrive when artificial intelligence hands us this overwhelming abundance of highly plausible but potentially flawed information.
Which is a critical topic.
Yeah.
Because this isn't just about learning a new software tool or navigating a temporary technical glitch. This concept fundamentally redefines what leadership and decision-making actually look like right now.
How so?
Well, the premise is that the core function of leadership is shifting. It's moving away from taking decisive action based on a scarcity of data and moving toward governing organizational truth in an era where plausible answers are cheap.
And abundant.
Exactly, cheap and abundant.
Okay, let's unpack this, because Dr. Westover identifies a fundamental shift that he calls moving from information scarcity to verification scarcity.
Oh.
So how does that practically play out in a modern organization?
Think about organizational theory over the past, say, 50 years. It almost entirely operated under a single, stable assumption.
Which is what?
That the binding constraint on effective decision-making was the lack of information. Leaders struggled to acquire enough data, to pull together signals scattered across different global departments, and to just produce timely analysis.
So the heavy lifting was in the actual generation of the report or the forecast.
Right. Generative artificial intelligence completely flips that logic on its head.
Because large language models can produce those same fluent reports instantly.
Instantly. And essentially for free. Generation now scales algorithmically. An organization no longer has to struggle to generate options or draft strategies.
The new constraint is verification.
Exactly. Plausibility is completely outpacing validation. Generative systems amplify this plausibility because their outputs arrive in seconds. They're formatted beautifully.
And they often read indistinguishably from expert human work.
But checking those facts is still bounded by the same old constraints: human time, actual subject matter expertise, and delayed feedback.
Right.
I mean, an AI can generate a comprehensive 10-page strategy document in 3 seconds, but it might take a human expert 3 days to verify if the inferential leaps, the data citations, and the market assumptions in that document are actually grounded in reality.
I think everyone listening can relate to that imbalance. I mean, have you ever used an AI to prep for a meeting or to summarize a massive PDF you just didn't have time to read?
All the time.
Right. And it spits out this incredibly professional sounding summary, and it flows perfectly. But then you realize you can't actually verify if the summary is entirely accurate without going back and doing the very reading you were trying to skip in the first place.
Yes, exactly. You're left holding this beautiful, plausible document, but you have no actual validation that it's true.
It's a weird feeling.
It is, and that gap between rapid generation and slow validation is where immense organizational danger lies.
So where does this verification scarcity really start to hurt an organization?
It intensifies under a few specific conditions. It happens when the task is highly ambiguous, when the AI model's decision-making process is opaque, when the feedback on whether you are right or wrong takes a long time to materialize.
Like a long-term strategic bet.
Right, and when the consequences of making an error are severe. So knowledge-intensive sectors, places like management consulting, scientific research, legal services, corporate strategy, they exhibit a massive vulnerability to this dynamic.
Let's dig into the actual stakes of all this, because it goes far beyond, an embarrassing hallucination in a meeting prep document.
Much further.
The research points to some serious psychological and organizational consequences when we interact with these systems.
The psychological toll this takes on us as individuals is actually profound. There are recent findings from researchers Masseri and Crockett discussing how people interacting with AI systems develop what they call illusions of understanding.
Wait, what does an illusion of understanding actually look like in practice?
Well, imagine reading a beautifully written, step-by-step recipe from a Michelin star chef. Because the instructions are so clear and eloquent, you suddenly feel like you possess the culinary skills to execute it flawlessly.
Even though you've never actually practiced the techniques.
Exactly. AI does this to knowledge work. Because the system communicates with such fluency and unwavering confidence, users start mistaking the AI's fluency for their own genuine comprehension.
So you read a beautifully articulated explanation of a complex market dynamic, and you just feel a sense of mastery over the topic.
Yes, even though you haven't engaged with the underlying logic or done the hard cognitive work to understand it, studies show even highly motivated evaluators really struggle to distinguish AI-generated text from human-authored content.
So how do people react when they finally spot a mistake in that flawless output? Because that illusion has to break eventually, right?
Oh, when it breaks, it usually breaks violently. That leads to another psychological phenomenon known as algorithm aversion. There's some great research from Dietvorst and colleagues on this.
Algorithm aversion.
Yeah. Once a user catches an automated system making an error, especially a highly confident error, they tend to swing wildly in the exact opposite direction. They lose trust entirely.
So they just stop using it?
Completely. They refuse to use the algorithm going forward, even in scenarios where relying on the AI would still be statistically far superior to human judgment.
Wow. So you have this massive pendulum swing from blind, inflated trust to complete, stubborn aversion.
And when you elevate that dynamic from the individual to the macro level, the danger compounds. When the volume of generated content persistently exceeds an organization's capacity to verify it, the entire enterprise begins to suffer from what is termed epistemic fragility.
Epistemic fragility. Let's break that down for a second. It sounds like a company building a massive, beautiful skyscraper, but the foundation is made of sand, like surface-level coherence masking a rotting informational core.
That is a perfect analogy. Decision quality degrades silently. Errors propagate through the system faster than human managers can catch them, and the cost of reversing those cascading errors increases exponentially.
Can you give an example?
Take financial services. An AI-generated risk assessment might exhibit perfect internal consistency. It uses the right terminology, the charts look pristine, the grammar is flawless. But it might completely misrepresent the firm's actual exposure to a novel emerging threat.
Or what about healthcare?
Healthcare is a huge one. An automated clinical summary might read beautifully to a rushing physician, but subtly obscure critical diagnostic inconsistencies from a patient's history.
So the organization looks confident, acts confident, and produces mountains of documentation.
But the foundational knowledge supporting all of those actions is entirely fragile.
So what does this all mean? I mean, if the problem is that plausibility is free but validation is incredibly expensive, how do leaders and organizations actually fix this?
This is where the Verification-Centric Leadership framework, or VCL, comes into play. It provides a structural response, resting on three core pillars.
Okay, what's the first pillar?
The first is admissibility boundary setting. This requires leaders to proactively codify exactly what evidence is allowed to be used to make a decision. They need transparent, inflexible evidentiary thresholds.
Let's look at the real-world examples of this from the article, because I think it brings the concept out of the academic realm and into the boardroom. The Mayo Clinic is a great one. They implemented structured admissibility protocols.
Right.
They require multi-stage human reviews before any AI-generated summary is allowed to enter a patient's formal medical record.
They are essentially creating a quarantine zone. The AI can generate whatever it wants in a sandbox, but before that information crosses the boundary to become an official medical record, something that will dictate real-world patient care, it must pass through a strict human validation checkpoint.
Another fascinating example is how JP Morgan handles this in the finance sector. They instituted the use of model cards for AI-generated risk assessments.
Yeah, think of a model card like a comprehensive nutrition label on a box of cereal.
I like that.
Before the output of an AI model can be admitted into a high-stakes financial decision, the model card has to be reviewed. It explicitly states the provenance of the training data, like where did this information come from?
Right.
It lists the validation benchmarks, and crucially, it documents the known failure modes of that specific AI model.
So it essentially tells the human reviewer, here is exactly what this AI is bad at, So double-check these specific areas.
Precisely. They are setting a boundary on what is admissible based on the transparency of the tool itself.
And then Bain & Company takes a slightly different approach. They created tiered admissibility standards. They actually calibrate the standard of evidence required to the actual stakes of the decision being made.
Which makes sense.
Yeah. So if a team is using AI to brainstorm ideas for an internal newsletter, the boundary is relaxed. But if they're drafting a turnaround strategy for a Fortune 500 client, the boundary becomes incredibly rigid.
It is about implementing floodgates. You have to control the flow of unverified plausibility before it crystallizes into organizational action, which flows naturally into the second structural pillar.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Because setting rules is great, but who is actually enforcing them? Pushing back on a perfect-sounding AI report and demanding evidence sounds like a great way to slow down a project and make enemies at the office.
It really does.
So the second pillar tackles this by completely decoupling the people who generate the work from the people who validate it.
Yes. The framework defines this as institutionalized adversarial verification. The core insight is that effective verification requires structural separation between the person prompting the AI and the person checking the AI.
Okay.
But more importantly, it requires deep political protection for the checker.
Because nobody wants to be the bottleneck. The social cost of dissent is huge. If a team is thrilled about a 10-page AI-generated proposal that took 30 seconds to make, and you are the one saying, wait, we need to spend 3 days verifying these citations, you are going to face massive friction from your peers.
Exactly. Leaders must structurally protect the people whose job it is to challenge the AI's output. Furthermore, the leaders themselves must absorb the social cost of that friction.
Right.
Institutionalized adversarial verification means the organization doesn't just tolerate pushback, it formally expects it and protects the people providing it.
We can see how vital this is by looking at environments where the stakes are life and death, like NASA. NASA adapted their flight readiness review protocol specifically for this.
Yes, they did.
Independent verification teams have the literal formal authority to halt mission progression. The people checking the work have the power to stop the people doing the work, and management backs them up.
And we see it in the regulatory space, too. The UK Financial Conduct Authority established what they call algorithmic audit units.
Algorithmic audit units.
Yeah, these are dedicated teams whose entire institutional purpose is the adversarial verification of algorithms. They aren't there to build products, they are there to break them, to find the flaws before they impact the financial markets.
Deloitte institutionalized something similar called verification holds. This ensures that specific project deliverables must meet strict corroboration standards before they can move forward. It's like installing a manual pause button into the corporate machine.
Just to make sure the human checking the work isn't getting steamrolled by the sheer velocity of the AI generating the work.
Okay, so building these boundaries and creating these adversarial teams is a strong start. But a crucial challenge remains. Verification infrastructures decay naturally over time without active stewardship.
They absolutely do.
If an AI system is highly reliable and provides accurate information 99 times in a row, the human beings tasked with checking it on the 100th time are going to be asleep at the wheel. Automation complacency sets in.
Yes, so how do organizations fight that decay? How do you keep an adversarial team sharp when the AI is usually right?
That's the question.
The framework calls the solution epistemic maintenance. Systems decay and human attention wanes, particularly when interacting with incredibly fluent systems. Organizations need dynamic, ongoing calibration to preserve their independent analytical capacity.
It's essentially going to the gym for your critical thinking skills.
That's a great way to put it. Microsoft approaches this by instituting quarterly code verification audits to keep their engineering teams sharp.
And the Cleveland Clinic takes a different route, right? They document every single time a clinician overrides an AI suggestion.
Yes, and they don't just file it away. They bring those overrides to a multidisciplinary review. They treat the human pushback as a critical learning event to maintain the entire system's edge.
Perhaps the most striking illustration of epistemic maintenance from the source text comes from Goldman Sachs. They utilize a practice referred to as manual Mondays.
Manual Mondays.
Yeah. They periodically force manual work rotations. This means actively taking away the automated generative tools for a day, forcing analysts to build the models and write the reports from scratch.
Literally forcing people to do it the hard way.
Yes. What is the practical value of taking away the very tools that make them efficient?
It preserves the independent analytical capacity of the humans. Think of it like a commercial airline pilot. Planes can essentially fly themselves on autopilot, but pilots are still required to fly manually at times to ensure their muscle memory and situational awareness don't atrophy.
Ah, that makes perfect sense.
If an analyst always relies on AI to structure an argument or build a financial model, they eventually forget how the underlying math or logic actually works. Goldman Sachs is purposely slowing down the generation side of the equation to ensure the human verification muscle remains strong.
But you obviously can't apply manual Mondays or adversarial audits to every single task. I mean, if you force a deep manual review on every routine email or basic brainstorming session, the company would grind to an absolute halt.
Right, which is why that reality necessitates tiered governance. Leaders have to balance speed and rigor by calibrating their verification intensity to the specific epistemic hazard of the task at hand.
So matching the effort to the risk.
Exactly. Pfizer, for instance, applies minimal verification friction during early-stage hypothesis generation. They let the AI run wild to come up with creative chemical compounds or research avenues, but they escalate to heavy, highly adversarial review panels when it comes time for regulatory submissions to the FDA.
Boston Consulting Group manages this using epistemic risk matrices. They map out different project decisions along a few key dimensions, like how much ambiguity is involved, how delayed will the feedback be, and what is the consequence if the AI gets this wrong.
A task with high ambiguity and high consequence requires intense human verification.
But a low-consequence task means you can lean much more heavily on the generative speed of the AI.
Exactly. Now, implementing matrices in manual workdays addresses the structural side, but the most vital shift required is cultural. It comes down to how an organization views and treats data.
How does that cultural shift happen? For anyone listening, how do you actually build this verification capability within your own team?
It requires achieving the cultural legitimation of doubt. You have to make it socially acceptable, even celebrated, to be the person in the meeting who says, I don't buy it.
Because historically, the bold, decisive action taker was the ultimate organizational hero, the person who moves fast and broke things.
Right. But in the generative age, error detection and cautious validation need to be elevated to that same heroic status.
It's shifting the psychological contract of the workplace so that challenging an AI's output isn't seen as being difficult or slow, but as a highly valuable, role-appropriate behavior.
Furthermore, the burden of that doubt shouldn't fall on one person. The text introduces the concept of leveraging transactive memory systems.
Transactive memory systems, meaning what?
In simple terms, this is an organization's collective brain. It's about knowing exactly who holds what specific piece of specialized knowledge within a team. By understanding who the true human experts are, you can distribute the verification workload efficiently.
Rather than expecting every manager to be an expert fact-checker in every single domain.
Yes. Recognizing that knowing when plausible outputs exceed your own validation capacity is a core leadership competence now. It is no longer just an IT issue or a compliance checklist.
So the overarching thesis of Dr. Westover's framework is that leadership is no longer primarily about generating action. Generative AI has inverted the foundational challenge of business.
Verification-centric leadership means a leader's job is no longer to be the person with all the answers. Their job is to build a robust system that can figure out if the infinite answers provided by AI are actually true.
Right.
It is about safeguarding the conditions under which an organization knows what it claims to know, and determining exactly when a claim crosses the threshold from a highly plausible interpretation into a verified organizational fact.
So to quickly recap the verification-centric leadership framework for everyone listening. First, you have to set strict, transparent boundaries for what information is actually admissible for making decisions.
Yes.
Second, you have to structurally and politically protect the people whose job it is to challenge the AI, giving them the real authority to halt the process.
Crucial point.
And third, you have to actively maintain your organization's epistemic health, regularly exercising your manual brain power and critical thinking skills so they don't atrophy in the face of machine fluency.
The goal isn't to suppress AI use. It is about aligning the speed of generation with the rigor of validation.
And the biggest takeaway for you, the listener, whether you were preparing for a weekly team meeting or you were the CEO of a massive enterprise, is realizing that your primary value in the generative age has fundamentally shifted.
It really has.
Your highest value is no longer your ability to generate content. Your highest value is your capacity to validate the truth.
If we accept the premise that leadership is now fundamentally the governance of organizational truth, and that disciplined doubt is the new gold standard of professionalism, it leaves us with a fascinating paradigm shift to consider. Does the ultimate leader of the future look less like a bold, decisive action taker and more like a professional skeptic? In a world where you have instant access to infinite, perfectly articulated answers, is the most powerful thing you can say simply prove it.
Prove it. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive today. We hope this framework helps you navigate the flood of information you face every day. Keep questioning what you read, prioritize validating the truth, and we'll catch you on the next one.